Hi everyone, welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm Ariane Zurcher, and today I'm going to be demonstrating the Antwerp Edging Stitch, also known as the knotted buttonhole stitch or the knotted blanket stitch. It goes by a couple of different names. It's basically a blanket stitch with a little knot. I'm going to demonstrate it with my left hand, and I will also then demonstrate it with my right. Give me a thumbs up, which always helps with my YouTube algorithms, and subscribe if you haven't already. I love hearing from you. Leave me comments in the comments section. Grab a needle and some thread, something to stitch on, and let's get stitching with the Antwerp Edging Stitch. For the Antwerp Edging Stitch, you're going to come up at the edge of your fabric. I'm using it's a 3-way thread. I'm using a chenille and a number 18 chenille. So my emerging thread is here. I'm going to go down and I'm going to my left. I'm left-handed, holding the needle in my left hand. I'm going to be moving left. Or if I'm doing a shape, a round shape, I'll be going counterclockwise. I'm going to take the next stitch, and these can be varied. They can be short, they can be long, you can vary them, you can do them random, you can do them all the same, and do essentially what is a blanket stitch, right? But then, instead of just going on to make my next stitch as you would a blanket stitch, I'm going to take my needle, and either with the back of it, a tapestry needle, or the front, I'm going to put my needle in under this stitch, going to the left with my thread wrapped around like this. I like to anchor it with this index finger of my right hand, and I'm going to pull my needle through so that I have a loop here, and this is going to create a small knot. I'm then going to take my next stitch, come back up, pull through, and there's my next blanket stitch. Taking my needle, I'm going to pull that thread through so that the thread is looped underneath, and I'm going to pull it through. Take my needle, go back down, create my next, what would essentially be a blanket stitch. It's a blanket stitch with a little knot is what you're getting. Push my needle through. I've got my thread anchored here, so to ensure that I get that little knot, come back down, go back up, and there I have it. It's really pretty using a variegated because you get to see the pretty variegation. This is a Steph Francis thread. I just love Steph Francis threads. But I'm going to show you how I did this little circle using seagrass. And again, this is the seagrass tuxedo. This is the thread gatherer. And it gives just a little knot on the edge. So it's like a blanket, but it has a little knot on it. Now I could weave something in through the legs here. There are all kinds of things I can do, little French knots here. I could do something coming in between these, going into center or coming out. There are all kinds of things I can do with this I could weave one over, one under, one over, one under. I could just weave something all the way under. There are lots of things I can do now with this stitch. This is it in the round, and here we are going straight along an edge. I'll do it one more time, and then I'll show you how to do this right-handed. So again, I'm going to take my little stitch here, pull my thread through for what is basically a blanket stitch, anchor that thread with my thumb or index finger, it doesn't really matter what, pull the thread through so that I get a little knot. Go back down. I can vary the distance between these as well as the length of the legs. And there it is. So as always with left-handed stitching, there seems to be two different ways to do it. So I showed you the one way, and now I'm going to show you the other way, where you have your work going this way as opposed to this way, right? I suggest trying whichever way you've learned to do the blanket stitch. You're probably going to be more comfortable. So if you learned with the blanket stitch and the legs going away from you, you'll find this way probably easier. I learned with the other way, so, you know, it feels more comfortable and quicker. But I thought I'd show this way as well. So I'm going to anchor with my right thumb the thread, and then with the back of my needle or a tapestry needle, you can go in under this leg, making sure that the needle goes over this loop. You're going to pull that through, and that's your first knotted blanket or Antwerp edging stitch. Come up, put your needle down, the thread is underneath for your blanket, and then you add that knot by anchoring the thread with your right hand and coming in with your needle under that leg, making sure that the thread is underneath, the needle is above, to create that little knot. Come back. You can see it makes me a little, it's a little harder for me, but mostly because I'm just not used to doing it this way. I don't really feel much difference as far as is one more comfortable. It's just, I think I'm used to it. So you can try either one. As I said, whichever way you learned how to do the blanket stitch is probably going to tell you which one is going to feel easier for you if you're left-handed. I wonder if right-handed people have so many different variations. Like, do you find when you go on YouTube, are there several different ways of stitching a stitch? I don't see that. It seems like everyone who's right-handed stitches the same way. But for left-handed, you know, I'll read instructions for left-handed and then I'll think this doesn't feel right, and then I'll have to figure something else out. And so I think whichever way feels easier for you, do that. So these are just two different ways of doing the same stitch, and hopefully one of them works for you. But there's the other way of stitching it. I'm going to show how to do this right-handed, but that is the Antwerp Edging Stitch. To do the Antwerp Edging Stitch, or also known as the knotted blanket stitch, I'm going to come up with my needle and thread. I'm going to take my next stitch and go down with my needle, making sure that my thread is underneath. Then, with the back of my needle, I'm going to come through this leg here, making sure that I've got my thread anchored, and I like to anchor it with the thumb of my left hand. Pull this thread through so that I'm getting that first little knot. Then I come back up. I go into the top where I'm going to have how long, and that'll tell me how long I want my leg. I can change those lengths if I want. Have my needle come up and over the thread that's down below. This is my blanket stitch, basically. I then anchor my thread with my thumb. I can use the back of my needle or a tapestry needle, and I'm going to come through that leg, pulling the needle and thread so that it goes over this loop. And that's going to create my little knot. I'm going to pull that, and now I'm going to come around for my next stitch. I can vary the length of the leg as well as how far apart or how close together I make these stitches. Pull that needle and thread through and continuing along in that fashion. Well, like the left-handed way of stitching this, and I showed you 2 different ways, and really you should do whichever one is more comfortable, I also found 2 different ways of doing this right-handed. So I don't know which will be easier for you, right-handed, but I thought I would show it. So with this one, I'm holding the piece this way as opposed to this way, and I'm going to pull my thread up through the fabric, and then I'm going to take my leg here and I'm going to go in and then up. So I'm still working on 2 tracks, and I'm going up to the leftmost track. And that gives me my first little L, and then I go in with my needle right in the corner of that L with the thread underneath the needle, and I'm going to pull that through. And this is going to make my little knot, right? Then I come back down and I go up, and there's my little L. And this is where I take my needle and I pull it through the leg with the thread going underneath. Making my little knot. And I'll just proceed in this way with my right hand. So I hope this was helpful, and it's a pretty stitch. It's another kind of way of doing a blanket-like stitch, but with a little knot to it. And don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you haven't already. It helps me with the YouTube algorithms, and talk to me. I love hearing from you. Subscribe if you haven't already. Oh, tell me in the comments which one felt better to you if you tried them both. I'm so curious. Let's keep stitching together.